What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actresses walks onto a daytime television set expecting a pleasant chat about her legendary career, only to be met with sneering disrespect and shocking accusations? In just 35 seconds, a routine interview turned into television chaos as Dame Judi Dench found herself under attack from host Denise Welch, triggering one of the most explosive moments in loose women history. What started as polite conversation quickly spiraled into a full-blown on-air disaster that left viewers absolutely stunned and the entire panel scrambling to contain the damage. The studio lights were bright as they always were on the Loose Women set. Judi Dench sat in the guest chair, smiling warmly at the panel. She had agreed to come on the show to talk about her new film project, something she had done countless times before on various programs. The audience clapped as the cameras focused in. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. But within moments, the atmosphere would shift completely. Denise Welch sat in the center seat, flanked by the other panelists, Nadia Sawalha, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams. They all smiled at Judy as the interview began. Denise leaned forward slightly, her expression already carrying a hint of something that felt off. "So, Judy," Denise started, her voice carrying an edge that immediately felt wrong. "You've been in this business for what, about 1,000,000 years now?" The audience gave a polite chuckle, but Judy's smile faltered just slightly. She maintained her composure though, as she always did. "Well, I've certainly been fortunate to have a long career, yes," Judy replied graciously. Nadia jumped in quickly, trying to steer things in a better direction. "Your new film looks absolutely wonderful, Judy. Can you tell us about your character?" But before Judy could even open her mouth to respond, Denise cut in sharply. "Actually, I want to know something else," Denise said, her tone becoming more pointed. "Don't you think it's a bit much at your age to still be taking all these big roles? I mean, surely there are younger actresses who could use the work." The studio went quiet. Janet and Kay exchanged uncomfortable glances. The audience shifted in their seats. This was not a normal question. This was not a normal tone. Judy blinked, clearly taken aback but trying to remain composed. "I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you mean," she said carefully. Denise leaned back in her chair with a smirk. "I think you understand perfectly well. You're what, 90 years old?" The audience gasped audibly. This was not the kind of question anyone expected on a daytime talk show. This was not how you spoke to a legendary actress who had graced your stage. "I'm 89, Judy corrected, her voice still steady, but with a hint of frost forming. You could feel the temperature in the studio drop. The crew members exchanged worried glances. The producers watching from the control room were surely starting to panic. This was going off the rails fast. "Right, 89, 90, same thing," Denise waved her hand dismissively. "My point is, don't you think you're hogging the spotlight a bit? There are so many talented young women out there who can't get a break because people like you won't step aside." Nadia tried to intervene again. "Denise, I don't think that's fair. Judy has earned every role she's ever played." There was desperation in Nadia's voice now. She could see where this was heading. She could feel the disaster unfolding in real time. Someone needed to stop this before it went any further. But Denise was like a runaway train. There was no stopping her now. Denise shot Nadia a sharp look. "Oh, so you're defending her? Of course you are. You all are. That's the problem with this industry. Everyone protects the old guard, and no one gives the new generation a chance." Judy straightened in her chair. Her expression had changed now. The warmth was gone, replaced by a quiet dignity that somehow felt more powerful than any raised voice could be. She took a breath, a measured, careful breath. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I have never taken a role away from anyone," Judy said, her voice clear and firm. "I audition for parts just like everyone else. I work hard at my craft just like everyone else. If directors choose to cast me, That's their decision based on my abilities and experience. Denise laughed. Actually laughed. A harsh sound that echoed through the studio. Abilities and experience? Please, let's be honest here. You get cast because of your name, because you're Dame Judi Dench, not because you're actually the best person for the role anymore. The gasps from the audience were audible now. Kay Adams looked horrified. Janet Street Porter sat forward, about to speak, but Denise kept going. People in the audience were looking at each other with wide eyes. Some were shaking their heads. Others had their hands over their mouths. This was not what they had signed up for. They had come for entertainment, not to watch someone being torn down on live television. The camera operators didn't know where to point their lenses. Should they focus on Judy's face as she absorbed these attacks? Should they capture Denise's aggressive posture? Should they show the other panelists' horrified reactions? Every angle told a different part of the same terrible story. I mean, come on, Denise continued, her voice dripping with condescension. How many more times do we need to see you play the wise old woman? The kindly grandmother? The tough but tender mentor? Haven't we seen enough? Don't you have enough awards? Enough recognition? When is it going to be enough for you? Janet finally spoke up, her voice sharp. Denise, this is completely out of line. Judy is our guest. Janet's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. She had been on this show for years. She had seen heated debates. She had seen disagreements. But this was something else entirely. This was cruelty masquerading as conversation. Out of line? Denise turned to Janet with a scowl. What's out of line is pretending that everything is fine when it's not. What's out of line is never having honest conversations about how the industry works. Someone needs to say what everyone is thinking. No one is thinking that, Kay interjected firmly. Judy, I am so sorry about this. But Denise wasn't done. Not even close. She turned back to Judy with an expression that can only be described as hostile. The lighting in the studio seemed harsher somehow. The bright, cheerful colors of the set felt garish and inappropriate for what was unfolding. This space was designed for light chat and laughter, not for this kind of confrontation. In the control room, you could imagine the producers scrambling. Should they cut to commercial early? Should they try to salvage this somehow? Should they just let it play out? Every option seemed wrong. And another thing, Denise said, her voice rising. Let's talk about how you've spent your entire career playing it safe. Never taking risks. Never being controversial. Always the darling. Always perfect. Don't you think that's a bit boring? A bit predictable? Where's the edge? Where's the danger? Judy's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't believe that seeking controversy for the sake of controversy is something to aspire to. I've always tried to choose roles that challenge me as an actress and that tell meaningful stories. Meaningful stories, Denise repeated mockingly. That's rich coming from someone who's been playing the same type of character for decades. Tell me, do you ever get tired of being so terribly proper all the time? So dignified? So above it all? Nadia stood up from her seat. Denise, stop. This has gone far enough. Nadia's hands were shaking slightly. She was known for being compassionate, for being fair, for being kind. But this situation was testing every ounce of her patience and professionalism. How could Denise not see what she was doing? How could she not understand how wrong this was? Denise whipped around to face Nadia. Sit down, Nadia. I'm not finished. Actually, you are finished, Nadia shot back, her voice steady and strong. This is not what this show is about. One, this is not how we treat our guests. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The crew members stood frozen behind the cameras. The producers in the control room were likely panicking. And yet, Denise pressed on, seemingly unable or unwilling to stop herself. You know what I think, Denise said, turning back to Judy with a sneer. I think you're threatened by younger actresses. I think that's why you keep taking these roles. You can't stand the idea of fading away, of becoming irrelevant. You need the attention. You need the applause. You're addicted to it. Judy remained remarkably calm despite the barrage of insults. I think you're projecting your own insecurities onto me, Denise, she said quietly, but firmly. I have nothing to prove to anyone. I love what I do, and I will continue to work as long as directors want to work with me, and as long as I am physically able. That has nothing to do with attention or addiction. It has to do with passion for my craft. There was something magnificent about Judy's composure. Here she was, being attacked on live television, and yet she wasn't losing her temper. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't stooping to name-calling. She was simply stating facts, calmly and clearly. But her calmness seemed to infuriate Denise even more. It was as if Denise wanted a bigger reaction, wanted Judy to get angry, so wanted Judy to fight back in a way that would justify this whole ugly situation. Denise's face flushed red. She clearly didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone who was supposed to be the guest, who was supposed to be deferential to the hosts. Passion for your craft? Denise spat out the words like they tasted bitter. Give me a break. You know what I think your real passion is. Your real passion is holding on to power, holding on to relevance. You can't let go. You won't let go. And you know what? That makes you selfish. Incredibly selfish. Janet stood up now too, joining Nadia. Denise, enough! I mean it. This is beyond inappropriate. Kay was shaking her head, looking between Denise and Judy with an expression of disbelief. I can't believe this is happening, she muttered. But Denise wasn't backing down. If anything, the pushback from her fellow panelists seemed to make her double down even harder. So you all want to protect her, Denise said to the other panelists. Fine, protect her. But someone has to tell the truth. Someone has to say what needs to be said. And if that someone has to be me, then so be it. She turned back to Judy one more time. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? You think because you're a dame, because you've got all these awards, because everyone fawns over you, that you're untouchable, that you can do no wrong. Well, I've got news for you. You're not special, you're just old, and eventually everyone is going to realize that. The studio fell into a shocked silence. Even the audience seemed to have stopped breathing. This had crossed every possible line. This was no longer just rude or inappropriate. This was cruel. This was mean-spirited. This was bullying. Judy stood up slowly from her chair. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hurt. She looked disappointed. Deeply, profoundly disappointed. In that moment, in standing there in the harsh studio lights, Judi Dench looked every inch the dame she was. Not because of any title or honor, but because of the sheer dignity she carried herself with. Even in the face of such disrespect, she maintained her grace. I came here today expecting a conversation, Judy said, her voice steady and clear. I expected to be treated with the basic respect that any guest on any program should receive. Clearly, that was a mistake on my part. She began to remove the microphone clipped to her jacket. Nadia rushed over to help her, her face full of concern and apology. Judy, please, you don't have to leave, Nadia said quietly, though there was a part of her that seemed to understand exactly why Judy was doing what she was doing. Actually, I do, Judy replied. I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be insulted. Denise, finally seeming to realize that she had gone too far, Shai tried to backtrack. Oh, come on now. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a discussion. We're just having a conversation. Judy looked at Denise with an expression that could only be described as withering. A conversation requires mutual respect. What just happened here was not a conversation. It was an attack, and I will not subject myself to that. Kay jumped in, trying to salvage something, anything, from this disaster. Judy, on behalf of the show, I want to apologize. And this is not representative of who we are or what we stand for. Judy nodded graciously at Kay. I appreciate that, Kay, but I think it's best if I go. Janet walked over and touched Judy's arm gently. I'm so sorry. Truly. It's not your fault, Judy assured her. Denise, her face still red, seemed unable to accept what was happening. You're really going to walk off? Just like that? Because I asked you a few tough questions? Judy paused and looked at Denise one final time. Those were not tough questions, Denise. Those were personal attacks disguised as questions. There's a difference. A significant difference. Perhaps one day you'll understand that. With that, Judy began walking toward the exit. The cameras followed her as she moved with quiet dignity across the set. Nadia, Kay, and Janet all looked devastated. The audience sat in stunned silence. And Denise sat in her chair, looking suddenly unsure of herself. Every step Judy took felt weighted with meaning. This wasn't just a guest leaving a television set. This was a statement. This was a woman refusing to be treated poorly. This was someone standing up for themselves in the most powerful way possible. The silence in the studio was deafening. No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. They could only watch as one of Britain's most beloved actresses walked away from a situation that never should have happened in the first place. As Judy reached the edge of the set, one of the producers rushed over, clearly trying to smooth things over, to convince her to stay. But Judy shook her head politely and continued walking. She was done. She was absolutely done. Back at the panel, Nadia turned to Denise with barely contained fury. What were you thinking? What on earth were you thinking? Denise tried to defend herself. I was just being honest. I was just saying what people think. No, Janet cut in sharply. You were being cruel. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, and what you just did was pure cruelty. Kay was shaking her head slowly. That was one of the most respected actresses in the world. She came here as our guest, and you drove her away. You actually drove her away. Denise looked around at her fellow panelists, clearly expecting some support, some validation, but she found none. They all looked at her with varying degrees of disappointment and anger. You're all overreacting, Denise tried again, but her voice lacked conviction now. We're not overreacting, Nadia said firmly. We're reacting appropriately to something that should never have happened. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of the fallout. The producers were likely scrambling in the control room, trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. The audience sat frozen, unsure of what to do or how to react. One of the producers finally spoke into the panelists' earpieces, and Kay looked relieved. She turned to the camera with a strained smile. We're going to take a quick break, Kay announced, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. We'll be right back. But everyone watching knew that things would not be right. Not after this. Not after what had just happened. In those few minutes, what should have been a pleasant interview had turned into a nightmare. Judi Dench, a woman who had spent decades building a reputation for grace, talent, and professionalism, had been subjected to a barrage of personal attacks that had nothing to do with her work and everything to do with one host's apparent need to tear someone down. And through it all, Judy had maintained her composure. She had defended herself with dignity. She had not stooped to Denise's level. She had not returned insult for insult. She had simply stood up, removed her microphone, and walked away. Because sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is to refuse to tolerate it. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is to walk away. And that's exactly what Judi Dench did. As the cameras cut to commercial, the Loose Women set was in chaos. Nadia, Janet, and Kay were huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Denise sat alone, her arms crossed defensively, but her expression betraying uncertainty. The audience members looked at each other with wide eyes, some of them pulling out their phones, already texting friends and family about what they had just witnessed. This was going to be talked about. This was going to be everywhere. Backstage, Judy was gathering her things. A production assistant approached her tentatively, clearly uncomfortable. The young production assistant looked like she might cry. She had probably dreamed of working in television, of being part of exciting shows, of meeting famous people. But this was a nightmare. She had just watched a living legend be disrespected and humiliated. "Dame Judi, I'm so sorry about what happened out there," the young woman said. "Is there anything I can get for you? Anything at all?" Judy smiled kindly at her. "No, thank you, dear. I'm quite all right. These things happen." But it was clear from her expression that while she was maintaining her grace, she was also deeply disappointed. This was not how a professional should be treated. This was not how a guest should be treated. This was not how anyone should be treated. Back on set, as the commercial break wound down, the producers were having a heated discussion with Denise. Her face had gone from red to pale. Whatever they were saying to her, it was clear that she was finally starting to understand the gravity of what she had done. The producers' faces were grim. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was a public relations disaster. And this was something that would be talked about for years. This was something that could damage the show's reputation permanently. And Denise, who minutes ago had seemed so sure of herself, so confident in her approach, now looked small and uncertain. The reality of what she had done was finally sinking in. Nadia stood up and walked over to where Denise sat. "I need you to understand something," Nadia said, her voice low but intense. "What you did out there was not journalism. It was not brave. It was not honest. It was just mean, plain and simple." Nadia's eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. She had worked with Denise for years. She thought she knew her. But this was a side of Denise she had never seen before, and frankly, never wanted to see again. Denise looked up at her. "I was just trying to ask real questions." "Those were not questions," Janet interjected, joining them. "Those were accusations. Those were insults. You called her old. You called her selfish. You suggested she was hogging opportunities from younger people. How is any of that a real question?" Denise opened her mouth to respond, but Kay cut her off. "And the worst part is that you didn't even see it. You still don't see it. You thought you were being edgy. You thought you were being brave. But all you did was bully a woman who has done nothing but contribute positively to her industry for decades." The 10-second warning came through their earpieces. They all moved back to their seats, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. This was not going to be an easy show to finish. When they came back on air, Kay addressed the camera directly. "We're back. As you can see, our guest Dame Judi Dench is no longer with us, and I think we owe you, our viewers, an explanation." She paused, choosing her words carefully. What happened before the break was not acceptable. Our guests deserve to be treated with respect. And that respect was not shown today. We apologize to Dame Judi, and we apologize to all of you watching at home. Nadia nodded in agreement. Judi Dench is a treasure. She has given us incredible performances for years. She has been a role model to countless people, and she deserved better than what happened here today. All eyes turned to Denise. She sat there, looking uncomfortable, but also defensive. Finally, she spoke. "Look, if people were offended, then I apologize," she said. But her tone suggested she didn't really believe she had done anything wrong. "If people were offended," Janet repeated, incredulously. "Denise, you called a respected actress old, selfish, and attention-seeking. Of course people were offended. I'm offended. And I'm sitting right here next to you." The tension was palpable. The show continued, but it was clear that everyone's heart wasn't in it. They moved through the remaining segments mechanically, so going through the motions, but clearly still processing what had happened. Every few minutes, someone would glance at the empty chair where Judy had been sitting. It was like a ghost sitting there, a reminder of the disaster that had unfolded. No one could forget it. No one could ignore it. It was there, haunting the rest of the show. The audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some were checking their phones. I'm probably already telling friends and family about what they had witnessed. Others stared at the panel, still trying to process the shock of it all. Throughout it all, the empty chair where Judy had been sitting remained a stark reminder of what had transpired. It was like a silent witness to the disaster that had unfolded. The audience, who had come expecting a fun afternoon of light entertainment, had instead witnessed something that made them deeply uncomfortable. Even some of them were visibly upset. Others looked angry. A few were still in shock. As the show finally drew to a close, there was none of the usual warmth or camaraderie between the panelists. They said their goodbyes to the camera, but as soon as they were off air, Nadia, Janet, and Kay all stood up and walked away without a word to Denise. The coldness in their departure said everything. They weren't just upset. They were furious. They were embarrassed. They felt betrayed by what Denise had done, by how she had represented their show, by how she had treated a guest who deserved nothing but respect. Crew members quickly began dismantling the set, avoiding eye contact with Denise. Even they could feel the weight of what had happened. They had been part of something ugly, something they wished they could unsee. Denise sat there alone for a moment, looking around at the empty set. The audience was filing out. The crew was packing up equipment. Everyone seemed to be avoiding looking at her. She could feel the judgment radiating from every corner of the studio. She could sense the disappointment, the anger, the shock, and for the first time since this whole thing started, Denise seemed to truly realize what she had done. But the damage was done. The words were out there. The footage was recorded. There was no taking it back. No rewinding the clock. No undoing what had been done. What had she been thinking? What had possessed her to speak to a guest? Any guest, but especially someone of Judi Dench's stature and character in such a disrespectful way? The questions swirled in her mind, but there were no good answers. No justifications that would make this okay. Perhaps she thought she was being provocative. Perhaps she thought she was starting an important conversation. Perhaps she thought she was being brave by saying what others wouldn't say. But the reality was much simpler and much uglier. She had been rude. She had been cruel. She had taken her own issues, whatever they might be, and projected them onto someone who didn't deserve it. Judi Dench had come to the show to talk about her work, to share her experiences, to connect with the audience. And instead, she had been attacked. She had been made to feel unwelcome. She had been driven away. And in the end, she had done the only thing she could do. She had maintained her dignity. She had stood up for herself. And she had walked away. It was a moment that would be talked about for a long time. A moment that would be analyzed and discussed and debated. A moment that would become part of television history, though not in the way anyone involved would have wanted. Because in those 35 seconds when Denise Welch began her attack, and in the minutes that followed, something broke. Something fundamental about trust and respect, and how guests should be treated. And while Judi Dench walked away with her head held high, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a host who had gone too far, one thing was crystal clear. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own humiliation. Sometimes walking away is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. And sometimes maintaining your dignity in the face of disrespect is the greatest victory of all. That's exactly what Dame Judi Dench did. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching what true class really looks like.